It's weird to think that Mandy Moore started her career in the 90s. Like you just feel so young and fresh, and I can't believe that it's like
Oh,
we've been doing this for so long.
yeah, decades now, multiple decades.
And it's not an easy job.
It's not, but like we were just saying, it's not easy, but it's fun and it's constantly sort of shifting and evolving. And if you can sort of stay on your toes, like it's the best. I don't know. I feel very, very fortunate to have a job that I love so much. And I know you feel the same way.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that we got to be in Times Square when pop culture was what pop culture was. Are you kidding?
Truly. I mean, it's so different now with the advent of social media and I mean just the world at large is so different. I feel again and unendingly lucky that we got we got to sort of like live our youth in that way with yeah, the 1515 studio and overlooking Times Square and like ringing in Y2K together. I
Oh,
mean, it's just like it feels like another lifetime ago, almost like it happened to other people, but
that's
yeah.
so funny to think about Y2K. Like if the world's gonna go, at least we're gonna be in Times Square.
Yeah.
It's fun watching the New Year's Eve shows. It's fun watching it, knowing where you and I. They called it Cabbage Patch Island, I think, back then, like that little island right in the middle of Times Square. It's so
Yeah.
fun to watch that show and be like, "Ooh, those people are cold, and I am not one of them."
They are freezing. I know I always think about that now. Whenever I watch some sort of New Year's Eve extravaganza in New York, I'm like, oof, I
Ugh,
am happy to be bundled up and not out there with a bunch of people shoulder to shoulder.
the energy on those New Year's Eve shows. MTV brought out some weird energy in those
Oh, yeah.
events.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I think I met you at 15.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that in terms of like your origin story, it's like somewhere between like the FedEx guy and your opening for NSYNC. It's probably kind of like where I think we met
Yeah,
ish.
somewhere right in there. Actually, I think I first met you when I came into like audition, quote unquote, for MTV, which I
Yeah.
don't even think that I really was able to wrap my head around that at that time. But
No one
I
had done it yet.
no one
It
had done
hadn't
it, and
even.
I just remember I was on tour with the Backstreet Boys actually, and it was like a day off, and I just remember thinking, being overwhelmed at just like the magnitude of being in the building, you know, like being in the headquarters sort of MTV. And like it immediately brought me back to years and years of watching MTV. And specifically, like right before my career sort of started, I remember I had just started Catholic high school and like getting dressed and putting on my uniform in the morning and having like MTV, like this sort of overnight, when it was still sort of like overnight, just showing videos. And it was right around Christmas
Yeah.
time. And like, just remember like the Mariah video, the NSYNC Christmas video, and like getting ready for school. And then flash forward, not even a year later, being part of the MTV family was just mind boggling.
And, first off, the amount of Say What karaoke shows that you recorded.
Oh my God, that's something I haven't thought about in years.
That show like built my Rolodex, man. Like that was there's a lot of people on that show for many years, and that show felt like it never ended. And
Yeah,
yet, when I mention it, people remember it instantly. But it's
instantly.
one of those forgotten little gems.
I think it is one of those forgotten gems, but you know immediately like you're like, oh my gosh, I've seen countless episodes. That was so much
Um,
fun. I just remember like being back in those moments of like, you know, filming, I don't know, back to back to back shows and just like
yeah,
you and me like heading into hair and makeup, then me going to change with Rob Zangardi and then like going back out there. Like there was always like 10 outfits in my dressing room, like all these clothes hanging on the back of the door. And it was like one outfit on, one outfit off, and like going back in to film another episode. It was such a wild time.
it's funny to think of how there was like always like new shiny dresses, or there was always like wardrobe. Your wardrobe just kept getting more. Actually, I think of Say What Karaoke, and I feel like in the beginning you might have been like a performance judge, and then there was like a fashion judge. And I remember when you took that scooch over a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, took a
You're
little
like,
step in a bit of a different direction.
uh-huh.
Why anybody trusted me with any sort of like fashion advice, I'm not sure. I can't really begin to understand that, but you know, as a 16-year-old and loving anything that was like bejeweled, I mean, I don't know why anybody took fashion advice from me, but neither here nor
Well,
there. It was a
I
fun
feel like
moment in time.
15. I feel like 15-year-old Mandy was all about like flats and almost not being as tall as,
Yeah.
and then there was just like this fashion presence where you really, so, and I remember you and Reb Zengard, like just like hours and hours, like our, I actually look at your Instagram sometimes and I'm like, oh man, that's like, that was my relationship with her. Like hours and hours in hair and makeup in between
Yeah.
shows and like
Yeah.
some real downtime that happens there. Um,
I feel like MTV really cultivated my love of fashion and really getting to explore another side of myself and sort of come into my own. I mean, maybe that was going to sort of happen um, all on its own, but sort of it did happen simultaneously while having these really deep relationships with very talented individuals, whether it's Rob that we keep mentioning, who
yeah,
went on to have an incredibly storied career as a stylist, to hair and makeup folks. Like I feel like I was able to sort of understand who I was and really come into my own and understand like my body and what looked good on me and what I felt comfortable with. All of that happened sort of like simultaneously during my time at MTV, which was a really beautiful thing to be able to now, like, to have carried that sense of self with me into other facets of my career.
yeah, I could see how it was sort of like branding boot camp almost. You're like, wait, how many? We shoot five episodes today,
Yeah.
so that's all we shoot this week, right? And they're like, no, we
Today.
shoot all 5 days.
Yeah.
You're like, that's
Today.
25, like a whole month worth of, like, you're really making me think here about like March, and you put the thought into it. I remember even, my gosh, it's so weird to think of you having your own talk show at
It's
like
weird. Not a lot of
16.
people remember that, but
Like,
indeed
hey
it did
kid,
happen.
here are the keys, have fun.
It's funny now, like to think back. I remember being slightly overwhelmed, but also, when you're young, you don't know what you don't know. I think if somebody sort of gave me the, quote unquote keys to the kingdom now at 37, I would just, like, my head would spin. I don't know. I feel like I wouldn't be able to sort of like metabolize that kind of stress. But as a 15, 16-year-old, it was like, okay, cool. We're in San Diego for MTV like summer, and you're going to like be shooting these sort of interstitials in between music videos, and you're going to have a whole group of people older than you, and you're all going to sort of pal around, and we'll just let you do your thing. And again, like now, that like gives me flop sweat to think about. Like I don't know how I was able to sort of come into my own and feel comfortable enough. I'm sure I would watch footage back now and sort of roll my eyes at how silly
Cringe.
I was, how high
Owning
pitched
you.
my voice was, but I did it, and
But
again, it was
that's people writing for you. I was gonna say like that
totally.
when your pitch gets high, and I was like, that's like not that's not her. You gotta bring it back on that
And come back down again.
and come right back. There we are, and now we're back. Here we are, and that presence that you bring to the table, like that's, so it's interesting to think of the speed you're going at, because who's writing all this stuff for you? Like writers, MTV staff, and like
Yeah.
show writers and things like that. So there's a lot of people throwing things at you.
A lot of people throwing things at me. I remember like I was always scared to wear the IFB thing, little like earpiece,
Oh
so you
yeah.
could hear like, ground control. You could hear the control room, and that was tough. I'd say the tougher aspect was more of the like the bigger sort of productions, whether it was Spring Break in like Cancun.
Oh
Sort of
gosh.
like I'm flooded with memories of like college aged men like saying inappropriate things to me as I'm like, like walking out with Carson Daly and Cisco and Pink and um
I'm like hiding you with a towel,
of
like
course
literally full on Big Brothering.
I remember those moments being more sort of overwhelming just because I felt like there were bigger productions sort of at large that I was just sort of one little cog in the machine of. And I didn't want to mess anything up. It felt a lot looser when we had those, 5 episodes in a row of Say What Karaoke, or when I was doing the Mandy talk show in Key West all those years ago. I felt like I was in a bit more control because, like you said, there were writers that were sort of specifically writing in my voice, and I felt like I had the ability to sort of stop and start and kind of learn along the way. Whereas like if I was filling in for Carson at TRL, it was like, nope, I was jumping in and filling in like these really, really massive shoes. And there was no, obviously the live show aspect of things, but it didn't feel like there was any room for error. So in a way, I feel like that helped shaped my work ethic, how I sort of like tried to come into the day's work like as prepared as possible. All of that, I think, really like, yeah, honed my sense of like being a professional and what a professional sort of meant and like brought to the table on a daily basis.
I mean, I've worked with creatives who experience what you do and they come in an hour late or they get overwhelmed. You would come in an hour early with
That's
notes
sweet.
and questions the night before. You would really tackle it. And I actually always admired that. Truly, truly did admire that about you because I used to love sleeping in the morning and you love being on time
Yeah, I
or
still
early.
do. I
Yeah.
still do. Yeah. And I don't know. I guess it's sort of just been at the core of who I am. I don't like being late. I value people's time, and not that I judge other people for sailing in on their own clock. Like totally get it. But yeah, I like to sort of like I think I'm best fresh like in the beginning of the day. I think as the day sort of wears on, I get less just like sort of less with it. Sorry, I have total mom brain right now. It's like I've completely lost all sense of a vocabulary. So bear with me. But
First off, we're talking about things from 20 years ago, so I can't
totally,
even.
yes, but I still sometimes I'm like I find myself like struggling for words that I can see, but just the synapses aren't firing. But yeah,
How do you manage it? Speaking of, how do you balance it all? Like this
I
is
don't
because you're
know.
just so consistent. You're so transparent and like just
Thank you. You're very kind. I don't
fresh
know. I
breath.
feel like I haven't really been tested yet for in terms of like figuring out. I have a 4 month old. How life is going to sort of work. I had to jump back into like my day job on the show when he was about a month old, but it was nice because we were sort of like winding down and only had a few episodes left to shoot, and so I felt like that was very manageable. I think when I go back to work in a couple months, he's going to be a few months older and be a little bit maybe more set in his ways, and so it'll be interesting to sort of figure that out because right now I'm home, I'm writing music, I'm finding other ways to sort of like check the things off my list that I need to do on a daily basis. But it does feel inherently easier when I don't have to sort of show up at 5 a.m. for work and figure out like where am I going to feed this child and how am I going to feed him and who's going to take care of him while I'm shooting. It is a lot, but I guess you just sort of make it up along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh, and my light just fell. See, I'm not doing it all. I can't do it all. I don't know what I'm doing, Vinnie.
You're doing a great job, Mom.
It's gonna fall again, but we'll keep it up for a minute here.
Well, that's full on mom. See, you already know. You've got those mom instincts kicking in already.
Sure.
Wait, how will you moving forward? How would you have like a system in place? How do you find time to create and sort of pay attention to making sure projects aren't just like ideas, but can get to the finish line?
Outsourcing, having help, not being afraid to reach out for support, like in all aspects of life. My husband and I were just talking about this, and I think we both subscribe to the idea that like the input dictates the output. So making sure that I'm still able to like watch shows, even though I know that that doesn't sound like it should be part of the job. It totally is. Like making sure that I'm reading and keeping current, not necessarily on like pop culture, because I don't know how much that necessarily like factors into the creative side of what I do, because I also have a production company. But it's like making sure that I'm keeping current with like articles out there and listening to podcasts and yeah, watching shows, watching films, like making sure I know like who are incredible new faces and voices out there that I should be aware of. So again, I feel like the input dictates the output. Being aware of what's going on in the world and constantly sort of filling my cup is going to help me in terms of like the way I just approach my job. Not necessarily even on that side of like the creative lens, but just feeling inspired, feeling like I'm motivated and excited about what I'm getting to do, the music that I'm writing, the you know, the folks that I'm hoping to sort of cross paths with and get to work with. All of that, I think, is dictated by the amount of time I put in to finding all of that stuff and dedicating to that sort of side of my life.
Like dedicating time to actually feel it, just
Feel it.
experience. Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
So when you have a brilliant idea, how do you know if it's like a song or a movie or TV show? Like there's so many outputs. So where does it go on a post-it note someplace on a board? Does it go in a book?
I wish it were a little bit more strategic like that. I mean, obviously, like we all have our phones in hand, so there's a lot that's always like kind of going into like my notes app.
Yes.
But I'm not sure. I feel like the more something sort of kicks around and sticks around, like in your crawl, like in your brain and in your heart, like the more attention you sort of are able to kind of like dedicate to it and focus on it. Um, I I also feel like I have a lot of incredible people in my life to bounce ideas off of. Like, how does this sound? What about this idea for a song? Or, man, I love this podcast and I feel like it could be a really incredible limited series. Or this article is really like, I feel like there's something there. And being able to reach out to the people in my life that I have a lot of respect for and just kind of getting their opinion, picking their brain. That's sort of how I've always operated, I guess. But I don't know. I mean, I think I'm still sort of figuring that out. I feel like it's taken me a long time to be comfortable in the position that I've had. It's taken me a lot longer to sort of become comfortable with the position that I've had versus how long I've sort of been in this position. Like I'm not one to have regrets, but I feel like as a 37-year-old woman, it's really just been in the last handful of years that I'm like, oh, I have I have a lot more power than I've given myself credit for. Like I have this incredible platform that I've built over the last, 2 decades plus now. And I should take advantage of that. I should own that. I should lean into it more. And I think it's my own doing of kind of what you said back earlier in the conversation of like starting sort of wearing flats. I think I started at such a young age at a time that was so impressionable for me, like coming into my own as a young person and sort of growing up and going through like puberty, for lack of a better term, like
Yeah.
in the public eye. I felt so much more comfortable making myself smaller. And I think I did myself a disservice by kind of living in my own sort of insular world instead of finding the confidence to sort of stand with my shoulders back and my head held high and sort of coming into my own and realizing like I have a lot more authority than I give myself credit for. And it's only really been in the last few years that I've understood that and really wanted to like take advantage of it in a concrete way.